Hello, I'm Toycat, and this is an insane idea for a video, but Sudan is in a crisis right now. They are fighting a very serious civil war. The country has more or less shut down, and honestly, I don't know why, so I figured why not find out together. When I want to learn new things about a real event happening in the world, there's free sources I usually consult, and so let's look at them together. The BBC is a very good news source. I find them to have certain issues, a domestic blind spot you might say. I find Al Jazeera is the same, but their blind spot is the Middle East more broadly, and so while I might not trust Al Jazeera when it comes to Gaza, or at least I would say they're quite biased on it, and I might not trust the BBC when it comes to Northern Ireland, I would say that they're generally pretty good for situations around the rest of the world. And then we're going to be going into Wikipedia, which can be controversial, but it's a good way to learn about particular factions, because there are two in this war, and I want to know what's going on there. But let's get started, because I have some biases to drop on the table before any of this. I do have a Sudanese friend, I have a lot of Sudanese acquaintances, and what I heard from them was kind of wild, but they said that more people had died in the last, few weeks of a siege in Sudan than had died in the entirety of the Gaza conflict. And also they said that 90% of the country's gold had been stolen by forces backed by the UAE, and that sounded crazy. The idea that Dubai is stealing their gold from Sudan feels like one of those stories you would come up with to defend why your country is great, but rather than just assuming that it's false, I'm going to look into those claims today, but also find out what's actually happening there, because there's a Sudanese RSF paramilitary which has just agreed a humanitarian ceasefire, which sounds really good. But again, let's learn about what's happening in Sudan simply, because Sudan plunged into a civil war in April 2023. So it's a 2.5-year civil war. It's been going on for just as long as the the Israel-Palestine situation, and almost as long as the Ukraine's current conflict. And basically it was because power broke out between its army and a powerful paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces. So how did they come about is my first question, but we'll leave that to the side. There are claims of famine, so there's famine and claims of a genocide. So there is the big G word coming up again. That's a pretty serious one. And more than 150,000 people have died in the conflict across the country, and about 12 million have fled their homes in what the United Nations has called the world's largest humanitarian crisis. So yeah, that is a big claim. It has to be said first of all, like, whoa. 12 million people fleeing their homes. That is a disaster. It is crazy that this doesn't have as much news attention as the other things I just mentioned, because that sounds far worse on the surface. Again, the Sudanese person I know is like, yeah, no one can go back right now, and that's just a tragedy everyone accepts. But I guess it's even worse than that. So why is there a civil war? Because in 2019, they ousted the long-serving president, Omar al-Bashir, who came to power in a coup in 1989. It's related right now, but I was doing research for a separate video about how the world's oldest president in Cameroon has been ruling that country for 43 years. So your options are have a president that lasts forever, or you can overthrow that president, but although actually that president overthrew the country in 30 years prior, so who's to say? But there were huge street protests calling for the end to his near 3-decade rule, and the army mounted a coup to get rid of him. But civilians continued to campaign for the introduction of democracy. So that's pretty reasonable. I think wanting democracy, very, very reasonable goal. And so it sounds as though the RSF might be pro-democracy here. Anyway, a joint military-civilian government was established, but was overthrown in another coup in 2021. This is a bad thing. It's a problem with unstable countries. If you can come to power in a coup, it means you might be overthrown by a coup, unless you can come up with a really good reason why that was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Like in the UK, our country was started because people murdered everyone and said, this is our land, but murder is illegal now. So, that's, you got to stop coups, but they did not. And there were two men at the center. We will say the head of the armed forces and the deputy, who is the RSF leader. Oh, so they were, oh no, the coup was staged by two men. Okay, that's fascinating. So the coup was against the military-civilian government by two separate people who now are on different sides of the same conflict. That is fascinating. That is a story by itself. But then Jen Burhan and Jen Daglo disagreed on the direction the country was going in and the proposed move towards civilian rule. Oh, both military leaders though went, whoa, we're gonna let civilians rule this place? Okay, they're both bad guys. Okay, that's, again, I'm really simplifying things. We'll have more depth as we go through this. But yeah, shooting began between the two sides on the April 25th, 15th of April 2025. 2023, following days of tensions as members of the RSF were redeployed around the country in a move that saw the army saw as a threat. It's disputed who fired the first shot, but the fighting swiftly escalated, with the RSF seizing much of the capital until the army regained control of it almost 2 years later in March 2025. So there's fighting between two separate sides who both agree that there should not be civilian government, but they disagree about which military should. This is one of the reasons why having two very different militaries might be a bad idea. But the RSF has brutally fought rebels in Darfur, which is a famous thing. They were accused of genocide and ethnic cleansing, and they've got a powerful force that has intervened in Yemen and Libya. They control some of Sudan's gold mines. There we go. And allegedly smuggles the metal to the United Arab Emirates. That's actually, well, I mean, it's saying allegedly here. So it's interesting that it's so allegedly that the BBC is sharing it. There isn't any factual, we can't prove that this is happening, but it is highly suspected, or at least shared a lot, that the gold mines in Sudan, where a ludicrous amount of the world's gold comes from, by the way, the gold mines are probably being smuggled to the UAE. So the UAE backs the RSF. People would suspect that they are backing them for that gold and carrying out drone strikes in Sudan. The oil-rich Gulf state denies the allegation. So that's why it's a complicated one, because there's no proof they're giving anything to the UAE, and the UAE isn't giving any proof that they are backing it. But it's a weird thing to come out of nowhere, that's for sure. The army also accuses Eastern Libya of supporting the RSF and blah, 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 blah. With the RSF formation of a government, it's likely Sudan will split for a second time. Oh, so that is fascinating. That is a BBC claim that the country, which right now has split in two, Sudan and South Sudan, is likely to split a third time. So we're going to have like Sudan, South Sudan, and then South Sudan. Or maybe there'll just be two South Sudans. It'll be like Sudan South and South Sudan. Fascinating by itself. And the RSF launched a devastating drone strike. Blah, 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 blah. Not to rush over this too much, but right now the country is very messily split. There is the army, there is the RSF, and there are other armed groups taking a very bizarre string of the country. By the way, if I'm gonna guess right now why there's three colors for the country, but a lot of it's in white. I'm gonna guess most people don't live in the white, and so it's hard to argue who lives there, because the River Nile is where a lot of people are gonna live. Again, just making a pure guess here. A lot of people live along the Nile, but not a lot of people live here. If I look on the Google Maps, you can see there's no one here, so the territory is claimed by the country, and so whoever rules the country gets that land. And so there's a bunch of land that isn't claimed by anyone right now, until they get control of the entire thing, or they split the country amicably. So, yeah, is there a genocide? I think that this is always going to be a tricky question to say yes to, or even to say no to. But thousands have been killed, and a campaign of ethnic cleansing with the apparent objective of at least having them leave the region. See, that's a pretty bad, that's the apparent objective of at least leaving the region and maybe dying. That is pretty close to genocide, has to be said. That is what some would argue is the clinical definition of genocide. And have only been, what attempts to end the conflict have been made? There have been several rounds of peace talks in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, and the UN health chief has lamented that there is less global interest in the conflict in Sudan. I think race is in play here. I think there's a... I would argue, not for now. Let's not talk about the race of the world's most interesting conflict and anything about that. Let's instead say, okay, the UN believes that race is in play. That's why they believe that people don't care. And Sudan is in Northeast Africa, one of the largest countries on the continent. It borders 7 countries and the Red Sea. The population is predominantly Muslim, and the country's official languages are Arabic and English. It was a former, I think, British protectorate. It was never a colony, if I'm not mistaken. But it was partially owned by Egypt, maybe something like that. It's 46 million people, so it has a population above most EU members, kind of similar to Poland. But the average income is $750. Which is, less than 5% of Poland. The conflict has made things much worse. State revenues shrunk by 80%. Isn't that crazy? In a normal country, when revenues shrink by 8%, we're like, this is a crisis, it's over. But if you're in wartime, you might lose 80% of your finance, which is bad. So yeah, the government in Sudan is not functional, and the two forces fighting seem to be the two forces who overthrew that government, and they can't agree on how to overthrow it. So now let's talk about, I guess briefly, the human story. People are fleeing Sudan. Where are they heading? My instinct says Egypt. I think Egypt and Sudan have a lot of closeness. Surprisingly more than Sudan and South Sudan, despite the name. So thousands of people are fleeing. 9.5 million people have been displaced across the 18 states of Sudan. South Darfur and North Darfur and Central Darfur have most of the displaced ones. But where are they going? There's 9.5 million people displaced. This is where Darfur is. It's all on the west of the country. 4.3 million refugees. Okay, so they're displaced within Sudan, whereas 4.3 million people have left. That is huge. That is a 10% of a country leaving. That's the same as 7 million people having to leave the UK because of conflict. I don't think that's ever happened. I don't think 10%. And so off that, you can see that 1.2 million went to South Sudan. 1.2 million went to Chad, and 1.5 million went to Egypt. So Egypt, I guess, like, in my mind, it would be everyone's went to Egypt, but actually just all over the place. Just getting out of Sudan seems to be the priority, but South Sudan, Egypt, and Chad are the seemingly obvious choices there. So that's what we need to know about the human side of the story. It really sucks for the people. There is a fight going on between two government groups, and as a result, 10% of the country and 80% of the country's revenues are gone and are going to have a real hard time coming back. So now let's go into Wikipedia. What do they say about the conflict that's unique to anything else? Because the Rapid Support Forces seem to be the one that we're getting a lot about here. So it's the Rapid Support Forces are widely characterized as being Arab supremacist. That's interesting. They commit war crimes and of a vast scale against Arab ethnicities. So it seems as though they are the bad people. I mean, like, if you read into it here, they've gone anti-Islamist stance, which, you know, for the region is like healthily progressive. That, like, you know, to be what's the word? Like, actually, I guess anti-Islam is not progressive. That's going so far the other way that you just almost that's horseshoe progressive, I guess, and that you're so far not progressive. That you accidentally look like you're, you know, doing like the Iran Revolution thing, but you're not. It's distinctly not, I would say, actually. And the leader, so in the 19 coup, they killed, raped, and unlawfully detained a lot of people, which is bad. You do not want to be killing and raping and unlawfully detaining people. So the RSF's relations of states is complicated. The UAE has been widely accused of secretly supplying it with funds and money. That is just fascinating. How is it that it's widely... Surely this should be... There's got to be transactions somewhere that is trackable. There's got to be, like, boats between the countries or planes between the countries. Because right now, it's got to be trackable if the UAE is supplying it with... Also, funds and money is the same thing, right? Leading the US Democrats to halt all arms sales. That's a weird thing to say, that the US Democrats are coming up on the RSF page here. But so what about the Sudanese armed forces? Are they the good guy? You know, again, I think that obviously the world is filled with moral gray, but if you want to cheer for someone, you know, it's I think in Ukraine, Russia, I think about 80% of people agree. I think it's kind of tricky in the other big conflict happening right now. But in Sudan, can we all just say, yeah, it'd be good if the Sudanese armed forces won? Well, let's find out. So the British Army formed them. So, you know, I've got to have 1% loyalty on board right there. They are the longer forming body. They've existed for 69 years versus 12 years for the RSF. So as far as continuity is concerned, that's their thing. They have 300,000 military age personnel versus about 100,000 in the RSF. So, you know, medieval logic says that you could just win by attrition if you really needed to. But what do they actually do? What's their... Okay, so after al-Bashir's fall, so since the outbreak of the war, the armed forces are garnering increasing popular support against the RSF from the Sudanese population, even from the staunchest critics of the military. So a lot of people didn't like the military, they didn't want a military government, but they're conceding if there's going to be a military government, it should be the real military and not the kind of half military. Yeah, because they are, I guess because they're just the military of the country, it's harder to like work out what their stance is besides that Sudan maybe should exist, even if under military rule. So I guess the worst thing we can say about them, going back to what's happening in Sudan, is that, yeah, they both believe that the country should not, they both seem to not, I guess maybe actually it sounds like maybe the regular military do want civilian rule. They're not specifically saying they don't here, but yeah, the main sticking points were plans to incorporate the RSF into the army. the suspicions were that both generals wanted to hang on to their positions of power. So it was a preventable conflict. It was a very much like two separate militaries who both agreed on something, immediately disagreeing when it was done. It kind of reminds me in that way of the China situation. There were the communists and the, I don't know what you want to call them, like ultranationalists, or the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China were fighting. They temporarily stopped and went, whoa, why is Japan invading? Let's stop that. And then got right back to fighting each other. The civil war lasted and arguably is still going on today. I mean, the Republic of China still claims all the rest of China. So I would say that maybe it's kind of analogous to that. And so as a result, what is going on in Sudan? Well, the military held a coup, and they kind of overextended themselves and didn't realize that they would have a coup immediately after the coup. And then the coup following the coup is between these two groups right here. The RSF definitely seem like the people who no one is on board with. It definitely seems like they've got the non-state allies of the Wagner group. Again, not a great deal of friends in the world, and not a great deal of good things going on. Besides, again, I feel like the most what's the most positive thing we can say? That they want to have a new state with secular democracy. That is good. I don't think being anti-Islamist. Again, if you're in a predominantly Islamic country, being secular means presumably having some Islamic values in your secular system, because that's what the values of your people are. You just don't want to have the religion be there. So being anti-Islamist is still not good that way. Having mercenaries is also bad. It's generally considered. Being supremacist for any one race over others is really complicated, especially in Sudan, where there's 600 ethnic groups. And so what is the conclusion? What have I just learned about Sudan in the course of this video? Man, that sucks. Maybe that's probably, I would guess that's the reason why it doesn't have more coverage. As much as the UN will say, I did load them up too. I find weirdly, the UN should be the world's best source for anything, but it's not, right? They're not. They're a deeply flawed organization in lots of ways, which is sad. Like, it's like everyone, it's like the government in Sudan. Like, you want it to be that the Sudanese armed forces are the good guys, but it's just that they are the better half of the coup that overthrew the coup. But anyway, I sound like a pigeon the way I'm saying coup over and over again. But I think looking at it, you can see like, yeah, it sucks. It looks like the RSF have a better position. It looks like a lot of people are dying. It looks like they peaked in 2023 and then have kind of re-peaked in 2025. But yeah, there are a lot of people food insecure. There's a lot of people fleeing. And so why is this not getting more attention? Just judging by my little thing right here, I would guess that in the world, we get media attention for stories that have two sides. That is, someone to beat over the head with a stick. It's really good to be like, oh yeah, Ukraine and Russia. Russia has a, not defensible point, but like an understandable point that gets less and less understandable. So there's a shifting in narrative there, right? But like, I think that even if it's not true, a lot of people buy into the narrative that Russia, NATO expansion is expansion into Russia's traditional sphere of influence. And so a lot of people are like, oh, but I get it. I don't agree with it, but I get it. And so, you think of Ukraine as, air quote, the good guys, or you think of Ukraine as being the force that you believe in, that democracy should prevail over whatever Russia's doing. And so I think a similar thing happens with the situation over here, right? Like, do you think that people should be entitled to their native lands, or do you think that do you think that blah 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 self-defense and blah 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 blah? Do you think that actually it's really important that you have a functioning state more than that? There's all sorts of like interesting questions that make these arguments go on forever. It's why I've been hearing about Israel and Palestine my entire life, despite the fact that the conflict really re-upped in the last couple of years. And I think so the reason that Sudan isn't interesting, I'm not going to say it's because it's in Africa, because it's in the bit of Africa that is very, very close and very, very relevant to Europeans and therefore the rest of the European world. Just saying, four continents are filled with Europeans, so we can say they all care about European values. I don't think it's necessarily that. I'm going to go ahead and say it's the fact that it's just a little bit messy. And it's a bit hard to are we against the UAE now? Because, my kids love going on their skiing holiday. Well, not skiing holidays. My kids love going on their influencer holidays there. Dubai is great in it. No income tax. Don't ask how that's paid for or how the citizenry works there. Maybe that is the reason why. That it's basically the UAE versus an established government that wasn't very good. It's not a very good narrative, and does it suck that people don't care about your country because it's not a good narrative? Yeah. Is that something we can fix? Probably not. But there is my first 20 minutes of research into the Sudanese civil war. I intend to do more after this, but I'm curious how you felt about this video. I try to be open-minded, which actually can be a problem. Sometimes I am so open-minded that I'm willing to hear out the worst of everything, which is a problem I'll get in trouble in a billion times over the rest of my YouTube career. But I wonder what you thought about this video. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you liked it, then I don't know, we'll look into other terrible events happening in the world in a similar way. But for now, thank you for watching. Second channel, don't care. Actually, wait, give me money. Patreon.com. I use it to buy lobster rolls. I had a really good one recently. It was great. Help me buy that and more down there. But for now, goodbye. Oh, there's a little... No, there's not.